Hi folks, this is a quick case study of football for comparative studies, and here we're just comparing Australian association football and UK association football, and generally speaking this comes up towards the 20 mark end, so you need to go over this information in great detail. Alright, to start us off, I'll give you a brief rundown of the UK history of association football, or football. Initially, football developed through the idea of mob football, so you had those village games, and you might have seen things like the Eton Wall game as such. And this game came to fruition during the athleticism stage in public schools, in which it was given status and rules. So all these people playing different versions of mob football came together in the public schools, and they said, well, we need some rules here. They constructed rules at the public schools, and these rules were bound and known as the game of association football. Wenceforth became, in 1863, the Football Association, which is known as the FA, and it was strictly an amateur association in those days, and often was directed by ex-public school graduates. So the old school boy network was still running sport in this regard, much like other sports in that country. Now eventually what happened was the need for professionalism. As the game expanded, working class old boys enjoyed the game, and they became good at the game, and semi-professionalism progressed to professionalism in 1888 when they formed the Football League. This Football League was dominated by working class professional players, so people who had a working class background would either work in the mines or the industrial towns, and this game was dominated by those type of players. In addition to this, the railway networks were being expanded and the steam engine was being developed, and that then escalated this concept of the league towards a national league, so fixtures could be played between such as Brighton and Newcastle because there was a train track that could take people to those games. And then what happened was in 1961 the teams decided for a strike, and they abolished the maximum wage you could gain as a professional footballer. Before 1961 it was capped. Also note that even though there was an abolishment of a maximum wage, which changed football entirely, certain teams such as Manchester United and Arsenal would still employ a wage structure, so they might only pay their top player a certain amount of money. But this changed football entirely because it now meant that professional players could earn much more than people who were working in the industrial towns, in the mines, or others on a full-time employment scale other than sport. So that meant more people wanted to become professional players. Now, how this developed the game was that as that concept of maximum wage developed, and now we had people on lots more money than you could earn ever doing any other sort of employment in this country, it meant commercial businesses started to get involved towards the mid to late 20th century, so we're talking about 1970, 1980 onwards. However, victory in 1966 for England in the World Cup encouraged further participation and media attention. So this is one of the first World Cups to be televised around the world, and the BBC broadcasted it, and it encouraged more people to participate in the sport. England were world champions. This led further and further to 1988. A company called B Sky B were using sport to attract viewers to their television station. So initially the football fixtures were covered by ITV and BBC, and they still were in 1988. However, B Sky B had decided to put some games on that satellite network, and what that did was start to attract viewers to this satellite network because it was a far more polished product they were offering. Ultimately, in 1990, 1991, this led to B Sky B creating the Premiership, which was a breakaway league formed from the best clubs which were classified as Division 1 in the Football Association League. Sky paid them £3 million each club to sign with them to exclusively televise their games classified as the Premiership on their satellite channel. So you could not watch the Premiership anywhere else other than the highlights on BBC. This led to a massive golden triangle in the fact that there was more media promotion of this new Premiership, which meant more sponsorship for the clubs, which meant more participation, and the sport grew. The sport grew massively in this period, and ultimately the smaller clubs started to become left behind because the teams that were in the Premiership were earning much more money, and the whole thing was escalating as to a point of where it is at the moment. And as I say, the average weekly pay in 2008 for a Premiership footballer was £13,000 per week, and that's at the bottom sort of level. If you're looking at the top level, currently players such as Rooney, etc., would be on around about £200,000 a week, all because of this golden triangle, sports sponsorship and the media. Okay, if you compare this with Australia, it's vastly different. Now, Australia, to begin with, we brought football to Australia via colonisation, and essentially it was only paid by the immigrants, so our military or people that would come over, and it was successfully known as the Pommy game because the native Australians or the people from Australia, such as the Aborigines, etc., would identify that as a game from the motherland, and they did not want anything to do with it, thus the Pommy game. They tried to isolate football by using the sports space concept. So the sports space concept refers to this idea that there's not enough players to play this game, therefore this game's going to be isolated, not one of our major sports. This sports space concept is also seen in America, where they have the 4 major sports and they isolate other sports by saying, well, actually we've only got enough players to play these 4 major sports, not enough players to play any other sports, so we won't take this up. Now that continued until the end of World War II, where a lot of European immigrants came over from Hungary, Greece, Croatia, those sort of countries, and they brought football with them because obviously European football was quite popular then, and they brought their culture with them. However, this led to racism, crowd violence, and foul play within their actual games. So although games became a little bit more popular, the actual standard of the game was very poor, and was often racially violent and lots of foul play. Each of those teams in this period were named after their own European cultures. For example, Melbourne, Croatia. Sydney Hellers is another name that's common in that period. And Australians, the native Australians, or the grown-up convicts, if you like, did not tolerate this foreign game because, to start with, they saw it as our game, the Pommy game, and now there was a lot of these immigrants playing association football. It wasn't very good. They weren't very good. They were getting thrashed a lot by other countries and in their local leagues, and therefore it's a foreign game. We don't need anything to do with it. And this in itself contradicts their whole ethos of the land of the fair go. So they didn't give people a chance with this. They just saw it as this one game. It's somebody else's game. We don't want it. Okay, now that differs entirely during the 20th century because football is now a major Australian game. And you hear things such as the Socceroos, which is the national Australian football team. This happened because of a 20th century government inquiry, a bit like the 1976 Olympic inquiry, whereby Australia were thinking, Christ, what's going on with football? This isn't right, something needs to be addressed here, we need to become better at this sport. Therefore, they introduced what's called the FFA, the Football Federation of Australia, and that was introduced to govern the sport, to set up leagues, make it more organised, develop participation, increase the whole ethos of the idea of football in that country. One of the first things they did was create a national league structure. So in 2002 they did this. and they removed the ethnic team names to reduce that racial conflict, to remove this idea of immigrant culture. They changed all the names, so it became Sydney Knights from Sydney Hellers, and I think Robbie Fowler was one of the players that went to Sydney Knights. This National League increased spectators, therefore increased participation, and then suddenly, same as when we had in England, the Golden Triangle effect happened. More media attention on this game of football, this new National League, more sponsorship occurred, more participation, football starts to grow, and it was the same for females as well as males in this country. Well, on top of all of this, there was success versus England in 2003, so that's a massive draw for them, obviously against the motherland. They beat England in 2003. I think that was at Wembley as well, so in England, which was a big draw. And then the World Cup 2006 had a very successful World Cup, getting far in that stage of the tournament. Underneath this structure, they then added a youth league to promote excellence for women and also males, and this was helped with further addition to the Australian Institute for Sport for football. So football is now one of the 26 sports operated by the Australian Institute of Sport, and an alternative pathway for excellence therefore is through the Australian Institute for Sport, as well as centres of excellence and youth leagues for Australian football. This furthered their ambition of gaining the 2018 World Cup, which unfortunately they failed. But what this did was, again, create more media attention towards Australia and football in highlighting and expanding and participation of the sport in that country. Okay, so you should have enough detail there to make comparisons and contrasts, in fact, between the two countries. If you ever got a 20 marker, there are lots of points to make. Both countries have the Golden Triangle effect. Both countries show a rapid rise in participation. However, Australia, much later, different history to do with the conflict. England, massive wage structures now, and much more media attention. Okay, any help you need, pop and see me in the office, but otherwise go over this screencast as many times as you can.